Watch the ride.
Hey everybody, hope you're all doing alright out there. So as you may know, I've had this BSA Goldstar on loan from BSA for the past 2 weeks roughly, and I've made a few videos along the way with it, as I do with my review series. So the first video was a first ride with my first emotional responses to riding the bike. The second video was a closer look, covering all the specs, looking at each individual component on the bike, showing how the seat's removed, all sorts of things like that. The next video I went to the country roads where I tried this in some really muddy, horrible English back lanes. And it did fine. It was a great ride. The video after that was testing this on the motorway and also going into a city, trying it, filtering and stuff like that. So you'll find a shed ton of information throughout those videos. This is the much condensed review conclusion. I'm also going to point out that, as I have done with all of my reviews for years, it's very much been my mantra. My reviews are honest, nothing but honest. I tell you exactly what my experience was like with the bike during the time I had it, but nothing more, because I can only talk about my experience with the bike I have for the time that I have it. If anything goes wrong, if I have any criticisms with it, then I will talk about them. As I say, that is literally how I've done my reviews from day one, and it is the way I'm going to continue to do it, because if you're going to make a review that is honest, you can only talk about the things that you actually experience yourself. And I also add, when you're researching something, you should never take one person's opinion on it. You should use each person's opinion as an amount of information, then you add that all together and then you make your decision from that with your own research. Okay, so the BSA Goldstar 650. This is definitely obviously referencing the old BSA of old, which was a 500cc. Single cylinder, weighing about 170 kilos dry, with about 45-ish, well 43, 44, 45 brake horsepower, somewhere around there. The new Goldstar weighs about 200 kilos, and I think that is wet, so it's a similar sort of weight. It has 45 brake horsepower from its single cylinder engine, which is very close to the original. It looks very similar to the original, but they've incorporated some modern touches in places that you had more archaic dials in the past, like I've mentioned in my closer look video with the front dash, which I'll show you in a minute anyway. One huge point about this bike is that it is only £5,000 currently. That is actually cheaper than a YZF 125. That is insane that you can get a 650 single cheaper than a 125 these days. That's just silly. But the build quality of this is really very impressive for that price point. Yeah, okay, you can tell it's not up there with bikes that might be like 10 grand, but it's definitely not bad at all from what I've experienced with this bike. A couple of off the top things to mention. The engine is made in a partnership with Rotax, and that is normally a good thing. The calipers on this bike are Brembo's, so that's money spent on the bike. And also, to give more context to something I was confused on before, the master cylinder on this brake system is made by Bybree, I think that's how it's pronounced, and they're actually a subdivision of Brembo. I think Brembo bought them. So they are Brembo calipers and partnership group of Brembo master cylinders. The brakes are good, but I got that slightly wrong before. This engine has got a slipper clutch, which is something I didn't know, and explains why I said a couple of times, wow, this really doesn't seem to have much engine braking. It has a slipper clutch, and that makes a lot of sense, really, for a 650 single. You've also got some modern amenities, such as a USB charger point on the handlebars, which is USB-A, USB-C, and a 12-volt charger down by your left leg. Of course, you will notice that the rear brake disc is on the left side, and the sprocket is on the right, which is backwards to nowadays, but it is in tradition with the original Goldstar. Now, I point out, I'm 6'4", and this isn't the biggest bike in the world. It's certainly not small, but it's that sort of middle size that you might find in like some of the bobbers and things like that that I've ridden in the past. But it's still very comfortable for me. In fact, in the 2 weeks I've been riding this, I have been perfectly comfortable the whole time. Let's just turn the bike on. As you see, the dials go that way round, which is, again, traditional for what the Goldstar used to be. But we have the added benefit of having some little digital displays in here and in here for your odometer and fuel gauge. And also this, which used to be an amp meter on the original Goldstar, now has all your warning lights in it, which is very nice. I think it's a cool touch to do that. Standard controls, nothing unexpected here other than the information button, which just puts you through trip A, trip B and odometer on that tiny little screen over there. But it's perfectly legible. Okay, so if we start the bike up, you may note that that is quite quiet for a 650 single, and it is. However, I have heard this bike with the baffle out. I've also heard it with the decatted exhaust, and it sounds way better. But this is actually quite nice to ride around on, that you don't disturb people too much. It's quite civil. And it does mean you can kind of get away with buzzing it around a bit, and you don't seem to be making a lot of noise, because remember, to many people, loud equals fast. Let's get moving. First thing I'll do is I'll show you the manoeuvrability of the bike. I've had no problems with filtering this, getting it through the city. The clutch is nice, it's not too heavy, it's not too light. Turning circle, as you can see, is pretty good. This is full lock. So it's easy to control at slower speeds. Continuing on talking about the engine, it has got one small problem, and that is that the EFI right at the bottom is a bit jerky. Now, you see, in first you might expect this sort of level of on and off. You've just got to get past that first lump, and then, you know, then it's smooth. But it's once you drop completely off the throttle, you are going to notice that bit of a jerk. Right, now I'm in third gear. I'll show you that still exists, but as long as you take up that first bit of throttle and live beyond it, it's perfectly smooth, and it's only just a tiny bit of take up. It is a thing, I have to mention it. Other than that, the engine's actually very nice. You know, it's a single cylinder, 650, produces tons of torque low down, and the gearing on this is quite long. But what that does is it means that you can actually get a bit more rev use out of the engine. You know, I've got a DR400, which you very much get through each gear very quickly, and it doesn't like doing 70 on the motorway. This, you can run the through the revs a bit more, and it still keeps pulling, and it pulls like a train if you're at just the right point. And the side product of that is that at 70 miles an hour in fifth gear, this bike only has 5 gears, it's at 4,500 RPM, which is at its power point basically. So it means that when you're cruising at 70, not only is the engine very comfortable, it also is ready to roll on without any problems. Now, while we're on the subject of the gearbox, there's one thing about this gearbox that I'm not the biggest fan of, and it's quite a simple one. It's just that the gear shifter, normally on most bikes that I have, when you're in first and you try and click down, the lever will be solid, it won't move. On this, it goes down still. So I'm currently in first, and normally if I hit my foot on the shifter, it's not going to move when I'm in first gear. It starts moving down, so my brain naturally says, oh, am I in second? So I have to tap it a couple of times to be doubly sure. I've got used to that, but it's something that I've not experienced in too many other bikes. But otherwise, the gearbox is fine. It's very mechanical, sort of clunk, clicks in nicely. Now, as I've mentioned in my earlier videos, this bike really does like to be short shifted and putted around, because it just responds well to that. Now, what I mean by that is not that it's not willing to give its power. What I mean is it's got so much torque with this gearing that you just don't need to rev it a lot, and you're still going to shift. And as you can see, it will rev out longer because of this longer gearing. However, from what I can see, the rev limiter is at around 7,000 or 8,000 RPM. You know, that was up to 70. As you can tell, it just pulls, and if you get the gear change right, it won't stop pulling. So I've only just got to fifth, and it's still just sat in that wave of torque. And at this point in time, I feel no bar vibrations, nothing like that. And that's one of the really impressive things about this engine, is how vibration free it is most of the time. Yes, at the higher RPMs you get a few more vibes, but you go up a gear and they just go away, and it becomes a very soft, smooth ride from a single cylinder 650, and that's really quite impressive. As I said before, I'm guessing they've got a large counterweight on the crank to even out that piston, and also as I now know, slipper clutch helps smooth it out on the downshifts too. So obviously I've done a lot of talking about the engine, but that's kind of one of the cool things about this bike. What more is there to talk about? It is an engine, a tank, a seat and some wheels. And the engine makes a huge part of that. And the character of the bike makes a huge thing. And I have found that this bike is very characterful, actually. The ride comfort on this bike is really nice. The seat is nice and comfortable, it's nice and wide. The foam on it is dense, but not too dense, so it's really comfy on your butt. The front suspension's non-adjustable, but it's fine. It's what I would expect. The rear, when I first got it, was a bit soft because they had the preloads right at the bottom. I've jacked those up to 4 or 5, and although At times I'm like, maybe I should put it to 5. Other times when I go on bumpy roads and I'm just really comfortable and not being jarred around, I'm like, maybe I want to leave it here. Maybe this is more the point. Because it's torquey, because it's small, is a little city weapon. The bars are the widest thing on it, so filtering is a breeze. Another thing to mention is the bars are a nice width, not too wide, not too narrow, for me anyway. So as I say, engine, tank, seat. I've talked about the engine and the seat. The tank, this is where I have actually had something that I have to mention as a criticism to this bike, is a possible issue I had with it, which is, keeping in mind this bike has a 12-litre tank. The other day, riding around, I have one bar like I do now, and I'd had that for a while, so I was under the impression I was very low on fuel. When I filled it to the brim, it only took just under 6 litres. So it seems like this bike is saying it has no fuel when it has half a tank. I don't know if that's just this bike, I don't know if that's all of them. It is silly in a way, but if you know it is the case, what I would do if this was my bike is I would reset my trip every time and know how many miles I have to a tank, and then I can just use that as a general reference. It's like you have a giant reserve on the thing. Now, as I say, the only reason I'm kind of okay with that is I own a DRZ 400 SM, which has no fuel gauge whatsoever, doesn't even have a fuel light, so I have to count my miles to know if I'm going to run out of fuel. To me, that is literally no big deal because I've been doing it for years, but I can understand that that is an extra thing that you don't normally need to do with a bike when it has a fuel gauge, because normally it tells you exactly how much fuel you actually have. Handling is a lot of fun. Quite flickable. It doesn't feel too heavy because a lot of the weight is low down. Though I will say that in the corners, because of the suspension, it can be a little bit, it can move around a little bit, it can be a little bouncy, but it kind of adds to the character of it. It's not a hindrance to it in my experience, that's what I'd say. And of course, as I say, character is actually made up of not a bike's good points, because a bike that does everything perfectly is clinical and people don't like them. You know, when a bike does things differently, when it has some slight quirks, that's where the character comes from, and to some people they might not like it. To me, I think it's kind of charming. This bike is quite a charming bike to me. It's fun. You know, my experience with it has been absolutely great. I've been riding this very much like I would my DR around town, but the difference is it goes on a motorway without any problems. And I actually did have a sort of thought for a moment. It's like, I actually kind of enjoy riding this more than my DR because it's more comfortable, it's more capable, but it's not quite so aggressive, and it's kinder to my aging body. So as I've mentioned, this bike has Brembos on it, and the brakes on this are great. Very nice to use, very progressive, strong when you need them to be, and with the balance of the front brake and some hefty downshifting with that slipper clutch, it really is quite a leery little bike at times. As I say, the note of the engine does detract from this a little bit. I think this bike would have a different feeling, sort of attitude, if it was a bit louder, because it can be leery. But equally, it can be very civilised and non-offensive. So let's just do a little brake test. Nice and strong, definitely very positive. The ABS is working fine there. That's a good example. You know, that corner is very bumpy. On my bikes, you get through there and you get rattled around a bit. On this, you feel some bumps, it moves around a little bit, but you don't feel too much of it, and you kind of float over the top of all of it. It's, you know, I kind of wished I was lent this in the summer, not the autumn, because down some country roads in nice warm weather, racking about, this thing would be great. Now, I've had fun in it, as I say, but it has been raining and wet most of the time. The position of the rear brake, for me, is really good. Very often on bikes, I find it's not quite in the right place. And yes, you can adjust it to get it where you need it, but on this one, it's just right there. Really exactly where I'd want it to be. As you see, this road is in a state, and I am not being jarred around at all. It's nice and soft and pillowy. Now, of course, you have no wind protection, and you don't have a huge amount of storage on you, but this is what these bikes used to be like. And if you want that experience, if you want to know, you know, as I say, the great old days of motorcycling, well, unless you buy one of the originals, this is as close as you're going to get. And as a reproduction, I think the fact that they kept it looking quite similar, it's the same sort of weight, same sort of power, same sort of engine, they've modernised it where they have to, and they haven't really done too much elsewhere, I think it's pretty cool. But if you're a purist, then I can understand why maybe you don't want to see it get the same name as the one from back in the 30s and 50s. Now, often when I have a bike, I try and work out where are they aiming this bike in the market, what gap are they trying to fill, and with this one, I actually can't really tell you where that is, because it covers so many different grounds in its universal ways, because of that's the way that bikes used to be. It's not specialised in any one direction. It kind of can do anything for anyone, with limitations on, you know, carrying capacity and things like that. See, it's not even bad off-road. I'm not sure there is a lot more I can say about the Goldstar. You know, as I say, it's an engine and a seat. It's a good engine and a good seat. If you are genuinely interested in buying one of these bikes, then it's very important to watch the whole series, see everything that I've said about it, and also do your own research, you know, to look into how other people have found this bike and things like that. But from my point of view, with my experience with this bike in the past couple of weeks, I really like it. I really, really do. And I actually, as I say, I did have a genuine thought to myself about, would I prefer something like this to my DR now that I'm getting a bit older? And I'm not ready to make that decision yet. The DR is very close to my heart, even though it's injured me recently. As I say, I really do like this bike for the way that it is. When you take into account the fact that it's only £5,000, that's really very impressive. And, you know, my experience, it's been just very enjoyable to ride around. And I am going to miss it when it's gone. Thankfully, I work ahead. So actually, this bike goes back the day after tomorrow. But I felt like I was at the point that I could make my review. I knew what I knew. Tomorrow is my last day's adventure. And I can't quite decide what I'm going to do. It all depends on the weather. But I think I'll have one more video on this bike after this. An after-review celebration. Thank you very much to BSA for lending me this bike. As I say, I give my honest opinions on bikes when I get them. I told them on day one from the first email, I'm very happy to review your bike, but I have to be completely open and honest, and any issues I experience will be talked about, and they were completely fine with that. If you've enjoyed this video and this series, please do hit the like button. I would really appreciate it. Consider subscribing, and also if you'd like to help support this channel, please consider doing that through Patreon and YouTube memberships. It is the only way this channel survives, is by the help of those people, because, you know, what YouTube gives us these days will not cut it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.